In my last video on the Klingon language, wait, sorry, let me try that again. KhAnubis vidyol tchanhol vichel jich op ach bashik mulchol. Dach tchanhol wab chojmach vinech. English hol vidyol jivanknish. Khijach jichech vivanknish. Hello everyone. Throughout my day-to-day life, I often encounter people trying to fake speak Klingon by just making up random syllables and using extremely guttural sounds. Like, in my point of view, if you want to fake a language, at least try to sound like you're actually speaking the language. How do you do this? Well, you have to learn what sounds the language uses. So, this is exactly what this video is for. Or, of course, if you are actually legitimately learning Klingon and you want to know what sounds you'll find in the language, which, by the way, good for you. First, let's start with the vowels. Like English, Klingon has 5 vowels. The first is A, as in car, E, as in met, I, as in bit, O, as in note, and O, as in prune. Klingon also has a lot of letter combinations, like some of the letter combinations I'm going to start out with right now, such as the AW, which is pronounced like cow. Then there's the EW, which isn't really like anything in English, but to practice it, imagine saying the word terrible, only saying it kind of like Elmer Fudd would, so it's like terrible. Then there's the IW, which is kind of like the expression ew, which of course is an expression of disgust, but in Klingon is actually the word for blood. There's also the AY, which is kind of pronounced like as it is in Y, the EY, which is pronounced like may, the IY as in key, OY as in boy, and UY, which isn't really like anything in English. It's kind of like the word gooey, only it's pronounced as one syllable, like we. Moving on to Klingon's 20 consonants, most of which are actually pronounced differently than they are on Earth's languages. Let's start with the Klingon B. This is one of the letters that is pronounced rather differently. Klingon B's and M's are pronounced very similarly, rather than Earth languages' B's and V's. In fact, some Klingons actually pronounce B's as M's, which is kind of a problem because often they would mistake words like Bach, meaning fire as in fire torpedoes, with the word Mach for we. The reason for this is because making Klingon B is kind of like saying like an Earth B with kind of a mixture of an M in there, like ba. The second consonant is the ch sound, which is its own letter in Klingon. Now, this is absolutely no different in English, however, it should be noted that it's always a ch, as in chew or artichoke. It's never a k sound, like as in the German composer Bach. Next, there's the Klingon D, which is pronounced differently than the English D, which is pronounced by moving your tongue to just behind your teeth. The Klingon D is pronounced by putting your tongue in the middle of your hard palate, which makes it easy to confuse with the N sound. Moving on to the GH, which, like the CH, has its own individual character and is not actually a letter combination. The GH also doesn't make an F sound, and frankly I've had enough of that. Instead it's closer to a K sound, like as in KhAnubis Productions, but you can pronounce that as KhAnubis Productions, I don't really care. It's a very gargled sound. So for example, there are words such as Hoshbach. I haven't been able to get a translation for it, but listen to how I pronounce it. Hoshbach. And listen to how I say all the letters too, notably the last one in that word, because it's actually our next letter, the H. Now notice how, like the D and the I, this one is also the capitalized one in the Latin script. This one makes a similar sound to the GH, but it's much stronger. think of German words and names like the famous composer Bach, or think of the phrase Ich habe eine Tochter. Next is the J, which makes the regular J sound, like in names such as Jacob, or Jack, or John. It's never as in the French Jo, and it's certainly never like German words like Junge, or Spanish words like Rojo. If it were pronounced like those words, then frankly it wouldn't even be, represented by a J. Surprisingly, the Klingon language doesn't have a letter K, even though it does have a K sound, so we'll get back onto that later on. So our next letter is letter L, which is actually pronounced just like it is in English. And our next letter is letter M, which is also pronounced exactly the same as it is in English. Now, you may be forgiven for thinking it is pronounced different because the B sounds like it. However, the B sounds like the M, but the M doesn't sound like the English B. So the M is exactly the same. In fact, this is the same deal for our next letter, which is letter N, which is also pronounced the exact same way. However, the previously mentioned D also actually makes a different sound, so it kind of sounds like the N. The N doesn't really sound like in English D, so it's pronounced exactly the same, but the D sounds like in English N. Now, our next sound is the NG sound, which makes kind of an sound, as in English or Klingon. The N and the G are never separate because, like the CH and the GH, they also form their own individual character in the Picard script, which the Klingons used. Unlike in English, this sound often happens at the beginning of some words in Klingon. So a good way to practice making the sound correctly is by saying "dang it" a bunch of times over and over again. Only difference is you just remove the D and A, so it's like "dang it." Our next letter is letter P, which is pronounced more or less the same way, although it's pronounced more powerfully with more of a puff of air. It's more like a pop sound. Humans have to be careful to avoid discharging saliva. Klingons, on the other hand, don't really have to worry about this, which is why this sound is in their main language. Our next letter is the lowercase q, which makes kind of a k sound, only mixed with the Klingon kh sound. It's kind of like a k. The kh sound is very subtle, so you probably don't notice it. However, in the uppercase Q sound, which is our next letter, yes, it's actually a separate letter, it's more intense, so it's more of a kh sound. Think of kh-plah, which is a traditional Klingon way to say goodbye, even though it really means success. It's real more of a, I wish you success in your future battles. Moving on to the R is more or less the same as it is in English, although traditionally it's slightly tapped. However, you don't really have to do this. Most Klingon speakers, most notably Mark Okrand, who created the Klingon language, don't actually tap their R's. However, if you want to tap the R's, you can practice this by saying words with the letter R in them, like reward or production. In Klingon, there are also 3 syllables that look like they rhyme with the English word fur, but they're actually pronounced as mir, mer, and mur. The S, which is our next letter, is rather interesting. A Klingon S is kind of somewhere between an English S and an English SH, but leaning towards the SH. For example, this is how a Klingon would spell the word English. It looks different, but it's pronounced almost exactly the same. Well, besides the angry shouting. The Klingon T is pronounced basically the same as it is in English. However, like the P, it is accompanied with a big puff of air and pronounced more powerfully, and humans have to avoid accidentally discharging saliva while making the sound. Now we get a sound that you hear a lot of Klingon and you never expect to hear it in Earth language. However, you actually do hear it in one word in one Earth language. This is the TLH sound, which makes the sound. kind of sounds like a TCH sound. However, you make it by putting the tip of your tongue at the middle of the roof of your mouth and blowing a puff of air. The one time this sound was used in the Norse language was in the ancient Aztec language's word for egg, which was the word tek. In Klingon, the V is pronounced exactly the same, and so is the W, so our next letter is our final letter, the Y, which is also pronounced exactly the same as it is in English. However, it should be noted that it is a consonant, and only a consonant. It's pronounced in words like yet or yellow, but never as in names like Mary or Johnny. The final sound isn't really a sound, but appears a lot in the Klingon language. It is the apostrophe, which indicates a stop in the syllable's pronunciation. For example, in the Klingon word for 10, which is wapmach, notice the sudden stop at the wa in the wapmach. If I were to remove the apostrophe, we would get the false word wamach, which doesn't really mean anything. This has been the Klingon Language for Humans. Thank you for watching. If you want to subscribe, please click on my face. If you want to watch a much shortened version of this video, then please click right up here. So, so either click on my face or click on the wall. Or you can do both, actually. If you want, you can actually do both. You can subscribe to KhAnubis Productions and watch the shortened version.